right, so we are lucky enough to have 4 Vietnam veterans here today with us on National Vietnam War Veterans Day, a day that's recognized for the troops leaving Vietnam March 29th, 1973. I'm going to start over here at this side of the table and have you introduce yourself, say the branch and the years you served, please.
I'm Bill Donahue. I live in Heartland, Vermont. I was an infantry officer in the Marine Corps. I was on active duty from January 1967 to March of 1970. And I was in Vietnam from October 9th, 1967 to October 29th, 1968.
I'm John Morton. I live in Thetford, Vermont, and I was in the Army from November, on active duty, I guess I'd say, from the summertime in 68 until June of 72. I had a 4-year obligation. I was in Vietnam from the summer of 1970 to the summer of 71. I was an infantry officer.
Wonderful. And just speak up.
I'm Dennis Baggett from Sharon, Vermont, and I went into the Army, drafted in April of 68, and I got out in April of 70, and I was out for a year or so, and then I joined the National Guard in Waterbury, Vermont for, I believe it was like 2.5 years. I was in Vietnam from, let's see, I think it was about June of 68 until July of 70. No, July of 69, I mean. And then I come back and was in Fort Riley, Kansas until I got out in April of 70.
I'm Jim Harlow. I was also drafted into the Army. I grew up in Norwich, but I now live in Thetford. Drafted in 1970 in Vietnam, 101st Airborne I Corps region in 71, and came home a little earlier than I expected in January 72. Ended up coming to the VA hospital, and never in my life thought I would go back in the Army and make it a career, but I found out I didn't play very well with civilians, and ended up going back in and retired from the Army 32 years ago now. Longest I ever held a job.
All right. So really, this is going to be a very casual conversation. For those of you listening in, if you have questions specifically, you can definitely type those in.
Well, I got a question for these other 3 guys. And I don't know if I've ever talked to a Vietnam vet that didn't have almost exactly the same experience. But do you remember when you got off the airplane, or if you flew over there on everything? Yeah. But I vividly remember at the time I went over, there were so many service people going to Vietnam and coming back every day that the military couldn't handle all of the transportation. So I flew over on a chartered flight. It was like an airliner with flight attendants. It was just like, except everybody on the flight was military. And we landed. I remember approaching Vietnam, and the pilot put this jetliner into a steep dive, and I didn't at the time know what's that all about. And at the last minute, flares it out, lands it at Ton Snoot, and I can remember he comes on the intercom and says, "You guys take care of yourselves, and we'll be back in 365 days to bring you home." And all of these flight attendants, there was a big stretched DC-8 or something like that, and there might have been 8 or 10 flight attendants that were all just sobbing their eyes out and giving us hugs as we get to the door of the plane, and you stepped off the plane onto this the ladder. There were no tunnels or
Right.
jetways or anything. It was just a ladder. But the heat, I can remember just hitting like an oven. Like you almost couldn't get your breath. It was so hot, and it was like, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? I mean, I don't know if you.
I remember that. I remember I flew into Da Nang, and it was on a commercial airline. It was done by World Airways.
Yeah.
And I think World Airways had a contract with the government to fly everybody in and out. And I remember coming into Da Nang, we were about ready to make our approach, and the air base came under mortar fire. And so I had to take a couple of circles around until they were. Yeah, and I remember getting off the plane, and I remember how hot it was.
I went over on TWA,
Yeah.
and same thing.
Yeah.
Where'd you fly? Where'd you fly in?
Thompson,
Uh-huh.
and I got off, like you said. I said, "Well, I ain't gonna be able to handle this."
I don't remember what kind of plane it was. I think it was commercial, but I'm not sure. And I don't really remember where we flew to. I've always said it was Cameron Bay because we slept on the beach the first night. But scared to death even down there. And I kept looking, when do I get a rifle? When does this all take place? The very next day, they put us on I think it was C-130, flew us to Da Nang. And we did draw weapons. No battle sight zero or anything to them, and I don't remember how many rounds they gave us. Put us in open trailers, and we headed up north to, I was with the 101st.
Yeah.
We had to go all the way up to, it's called Camp Eagle, but it was north of Fubai and up in that area.
Right.
And
So we were in the same area.
yeah, oh yeah, when you were talking. But yeah, I remember the flight home more than the part I do remember. This is before I got orders for Vietnam. When we were at Fort Dix, New Jersey, they took us out on the tarmac when the flights were coming back from Vietnam. And we were still in civilian clothes or the head shaved, and they had us sitting in circles. And the veterans were getting off. And I remember, we just mentioned this the other day, we looked at them and thought, they were old. Why are us young guys doing this? And they were probably our age.
Yeah.
And they would come over, and a couple of them messed with us a little bit, but they were just so happy to be home. And best advice I ever got, they said, keep your ass down and your head lower, and walked away. But it was just different. But when we got there, I don't remember that. I do remember the flight home.
Yeah, I remember.
And the process we had to go through to get to that flight.
I don't remember that process. I remember the flight. The flight home was from Da Nang to Okinawa, which is just a 2-hour flight. And, when the plane took off out of Da Nang, there was this big roar went up, and the stewardesses, this was back in the day when the stewards or stewardesses, they were all under the age of 35 years old.
Yeah.
Pretty hair. And it was like a party up there. I mean, they gave us beer, cold cans of beer, and, there's lewd comments, dancing in the aisle of the plane, and it was great.
Yeah. Did you, I think it might have been Okinawa where we had to get off the flight and refuel and stuff, but they told us we could go in and buy booze, but one, you couldn't drink it and get on the plane drunk. You couldn't, if it was sealed, it had to stay sealed when you got on the plane. And all I remember is 4 of us had a bottle of vodka and opened it, and 4 of us just drank it when we were in line going towards the plane. And there was more bottles along that line. We were almost walking a gauntlet.
Empty bottles.
And we got on, and we were just so nervous going home. We slept pretty good for a few hours there, and went into Fort Lewis, Washington.
Yeah.
Got our steak dinner. But I don't remember the flight over very much. I don't remember a whole bunch about that. I think natural figure.
Well, the other thing I remember about landing in Thompson is, I can remember asking somebody, it might have been another one of the passengers, who maybe was on his second or third tour or something, so he knew more about it. I said, what was about that steep descent? And he said, well, it's so that the Viet Cong can't shoot you on the way in. I mean, it's a gold mine for them if they can knock one of these airliners out of the sky before you even arrive. And then I remember we went down the stairs, and I'm still sort of trying to get used to the heat. And I noticed that there was this, walking across the tarmac, there's just a whole big long line of us who arriving, and off to the side of the tarmac there's this sort of chain link fence, and I could see that there was some kind of a disturbance or something behind the fence, and I looked more closely, and it was people, but I almost couldn't make them out. I was like, what the heck? And then I realized that these are all the guys that have survived a year in Vietnam, and they're getting on this plane to go home. And they've all got, the uniforms are all ratty and faded, and they've all got these big, cumbersome, bracelets and things that woven out of probably shoelaces or bootlaces, and they're wearing hats with hand grenade rings, hooked onto their hats. And as we're walking off the plane, they start singing, "You're going home in a body bag, doo-dah, doo-dah. You're going home in a body bag, yay, doo-dah, yay." All of them. There's like 100 of them or more. And I'm thinking, geez, these are the guys who survived. And this is what I'm going to be like a year from now if I make it.
Yeah.
And they took my uniform away from me when I got back, before we got on the plane to go to Japan. They said, "You're not going back with that way." It smelled, I didn't know, a couple of days before you're out on a fire base, and you come back, and the one I wanted was my poncho liner. I really wanted my poncho liner, and that was gone. They took my boots and threw them away, and they said, you need to be decontaminated.
Yeah, speaking of clothing, when I was out in the field, I just wore 4 items of clothing. I wore my tunic, wore my trousers, left boot and right boot. No underwear, no socks.
No. In the Marines, did they have those underwear where the seam went up one leg? We'd take them anyway. We never wore the underwear, but they would use them and tear them up to clean the rifles and stuff. But t-shirt, and then on fire bases they would fly in Connex and just drop the Connex, and if you got cleaned up a little bit, you could go in there and maybe find a different shirt or something to put on. I found one that had a lieutenant's rank on it. And except our Eagles.
Yeah.
101st, they were not subdued when we were there. And they did come off pretty easy. We had to, because if you were out at night on guard, or what they call the ambush patrol thing, where you're out in front of your own line, they showed up pretty good. So we get them off, take them off.
I was in the 9th Infantry Division, and down in Delta, it was so muddy and everything in the monsoon season that we didn't wear socks either.
Yeah.
Because your feet were soaked all the time. So, and
Yeah, the mud could be something. I was stationed at Compiègne for 6, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, and it's just incredible mud. I saw a tank, an M48 tank, sunk in the mud up to its turret. They had, planks, 2 by 12 planks, going out to walk out to the turret. They finally extricated it, but it was just incredible. You know,
No, the gun that I was on weighed 6 tons, just the gun alone.
is that right? Yeah.
And you had your 2 wheels and your trails come out,
Yeah.
and you'd fire it twice if you was lucky. And then you'd have to reset the whole thing because it would
Yeah.
just sunk right down into the ground. And if you threw the round to go into the tube that weighed 98 pounds, if it came back out, it just sunk right into the ground.
So how long would it take you to reset a gun like that? There was a pole, as I remember, there was a pole, it was red and white striped or something like that, and you aim it on that?
Yeah, you had your sight pole on your gun.
Yeah.
And then you would go back so many meters with your rod, and they would
They were
Sight off
saying
the
you
back.
had to take the fire out of the
Yeah.
old lady. The angle of lay is the old lady,
Uh-huh.
and that was you had to take it and subtract it, and then shoot it out there. But my thought was most of Vietnam, they didn't really care what they blew up unless it was really close in and you needed support fire.
Well, I wasn't a gunner, the one that set all the quadrants and everything, but those came down from Fire Direction Center, which the Fire Direction Center got it from a forward observer that was up in the air in a little Piper Cub type of plane. And then they would figure it out at Fire Direction Center, and then they would give it a quadrants and deflections to us. And then they would set the gun up, and I was the assistant gunner. So I was the one that pulled the lanyard and fired it. And,
John, what did you do over there? He was deferring to us, trying to get the conversation away from him. But,
I was a mobile advisory team leader down in the Delta. And I was probably the most poorly prepared infantry officer in Vietnam at the time, because my first 2 years I was assigned to the Biathlon Training Center at Fort Richardson, Alaska. And all I did was train for the Biathlon World Championships, the military ski championships, and the Olympics. And there were about 20 guys in the unit at that time. They really didn't, most of us had skied in college, and they didn't really recognize any rank. So there were guys, athletes on the team that were PFCs, and there were athletes on the team that were captains. But everybody just wore training uniforms. We didn't wear ranks or anything. And so I got to Vietnam, was assigned to this mobile advisory team. You know, I'd never called in, medevac. I'd never used the radio. I was just woefully unprepared. Luckily, I had good team members. I got this is a picture of my MAT team, and we were down in this little village in the Delta called Tan Pho Cung, and it was in Phong Hep district, Phong Dinh province. It was the big city in the province. The capital of the province was Can Tho.
yeah,
And,
I was there.
yeah, we could drive from Phong Hep up to Can Tho, but you couldn't. The only way to get down to this little village of Tan Pho Cung was to take a boat. We had a Boston whaler it was painted olive drab. But these are just some of my assistants. And the guys in the MAT team all gave them names from Peanuts, like Pigpen and Lucy and Linus and all the rest of them. And then when I was there for I don't know how many months, and but then I got transferred, and on my way out, my counterpart, who was a Vietnamese lieutenant, whom I was supposed to be advising, but he knew more about fighting and about that area of Vietnam than I would ever know. And he was very, very capable, very, a remarkable, relatively young guy. And so when I told him that I was going to be reassigned, he said, "Oh, I've got something for you," and he gave me this, which is a Viet Cong flag, and I wasn't really into any kind of souvenirs or anything. But I recognized his generosity, and I said, "Oh, well, thank you, Lieutenant. Where did you get this?" And he said, "Just across the canal. They make them right over there." And he pointed to some hooches that were just across the canal from our outpost. So we were basically trying to win the hearts and minds of people, I think, who already had their hearts and minds won by the other side.
Yeah.
But unfortunately for us, we were at a point in the conflict where the enemy just realized they're going to go home anyway. No need to stir up any more of a hornet's nest. We just so we did our thing and they did their thing, and we minimum amount of conflict.
And here you are today.
I know, feeling very, very fortunate about that too. Yeah, very.
After I was on a gun for about 6 months, I was having trouble with my ears, so they took me off the gun for a while and put me on the ration truck driver to go back and forth from our camp to the base camp in Dongting. And I had to cross the Meituan River on a Navy
Ferry.
it was like a ferry. The tail dropped down, drove on. So I had to go across Meituan River that way. And that was the only way we could get into Dongting.
So was that south of Saigon?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was right down close to the point.
Okay.
So your story about the mud reminded me of a sort of a related incident. That for a while I was co-located with a district team in Phong Hep, and that's a fairly. It's not a big city, but it's a fairly major, I guess you'd say, economic or commercial region, because it was 5 major canals that all joined in this big sort of star-shaped junction of canals, and all of the transportation in that part of the delta was on the canals, but dry ground was at such a premium down there that every so often, and I don't know whether it was the U.S. Navy or whether it was the Vietnamese, but every so often there would be this gigantic barge. I mean, I don't know, it had to be hundreds of feet long, but it was just a big flat barge full of gravel. It was piled up, probably 30 feet high, full of gravel. And they had this giant army bulldozer, like a D8 or something, that they'd used to push the gravel around, and then they had a big front end loader. And so I'm sure that they were using this gravel for just the kind of things that you were describing, to try to solid up positions for artillery and so forth. But what happened was that this gravel was so precious to the Vietnamese that at nighttime they'd come along with their sandpans and they'd basically take what they needed, to the point where one time we had to go inspect because they'd taken so much gravel off the side of the big boat that the thing flipped. And half a load of gravel ended up in the bottom of the canal because they just kept stealing it off the outer side where nobody could see them. I can remember going down and just looking with this, basically a big, I don't know if you'd call it an accident or, but they had to try to find some way to flip the barge back over and get it out of there. And I don't know if they ever salvaged the gravel that was in the bottom of the canal or.
This reminds me of a story about, what the Vietnamese could do just with, their hands and little shovels. I got into country not long after we converted from the M14 to the M60. And there were hundreds of thousands of 7.62 rounds around Da Nang that were no longer needed. And so the Marines, or maybe it was the Seabees, they took this heavy equipment, dug a deep goddamn hole, and put all these rounds down in the hole. And then they left the area. I mean, that was just abandoned. And when they came back 2 or 3 or 4 weeks later, hole was open, all the ammo was gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they were so good that they could take a blacktop road and dig a hole out of the blacktop, put in a satchel charge or some kind of a explosive, fill it back over, and you couldn't hardly tell that they had even been in there that night. Yeah. I used to have to, the ramp going to get onto the barge, I had to inspect it before I drove down there. And of course I was bringing the guys back that was going to be leaving. And I had a whole group of them on the back of the truck coming down. And I said, I gotta stop here. I said, you guys cover me while I go down and check it. And they said, oh, you don't need to do that. I said, oh, yes, we do.
Yeah.
I said, I'm not going to take a chance on you guys. You guys are headed home. I said, I'm not taking no chance on you guys not making it because of my stupidity. And, they all thanked me and everything, but some of them walked right down along with me. And, it was just, that was the way that they were. We had a company of engineers right with us, because they might have to pull our gun out of the mud or pull our truck out or something like that, and then they had to take care of the roads, coming in from the Michoacán River into our camp. So they was right there with us all the time. And I remember one time in the mud season, the gun sunk down. I hooked onto it with a 5-ton, and just as soon as I started to pull ahead, the bottom gave right out of the 5-ton, and I was sitting right on the frame.
Really?
And there was so much suction that they couldn't even pull it with a dozer. They had to put a bucket loader underneath the front and underneath the back, and just keep rocking it until they got it broke loose to get it up out of the mud.
Now, when you say a 5-ton, you're talking about a truck I think we used to call the 6x?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there was 2 of them. There was a 5-ton and a nooseman. They were both 6x.
Yeah.
And a 10-ton was too, but that was considered a lot bigger one.
Well,
The 10-ton was more tractor trailer and wrecker.
yeah. The one I'm familiar with was you could carry 5 tons across the ground and it could carry 10 tons on the highway.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what you call a 5-ton?
Yeah.
And what's a deuce and a half?
2.5 ton.
Okay, we didn't have
It was the same idea, only it was a smaller Yeah.
Thought of all this stuff in a long. I'm going down in the next couple of weeks. My best friend from Vietnam just passed away.
Oh, sorry.
But Agent Orange. I could take my hands like this and go right around his arm. But we took him on his first mission up to, would have been just north of Wade. And best cup of coffee I ever had in my life. And it was monsoons, and he was like a brand new kid. We called new guy, I don't know what Marines call them, we call them cherry boys, because all our uniforms were brand new, and we had the sunburns and all this stuff. And took him up to fire base, and he was soaked. If you could imagine a little 3-year-old kid playing in a mud puddle, that was Jeff. And but the next morning I'd say you just go to sleep. You didn't ponchos, you'd sweat like crazy and under them, so we didn't use them. You just got wet and lived with it. But he was trying to divert where he found a little twig, I don't know, but we remember laughing at him. He's trying to divert the water from going around him.
With the twig, yeah.
Oh, it was so funny. And the next morning, we finally figured out, because we would cook our food with the C4. Yeah, and it would work, and he just couldn't wait to try that. But he took our C-rations, and he had a John Wayne bar, powdered coffee, powdered milk. I forget what else he threw in there. That was the best cup of coffee to this day, and I told him when I last saw him a few months ago.
All right.
P38.
I've got my original one on. I've got my original one on my original dog tags, and I can open a can, and my wife can take a P38 now and just.
Yeah, that's the way I open.
And but he was just so proud of making that coffee, and I was telling him about it when we went down. It was just one of the best memories I ever had, and took him on his first mission. And, I got to say goodbye to him in a couple of weeks here. It's too late now, but I did get a chance to go down and see him and say goodbye. But you know, he told me something strange, and that's what I was just thinking about when you guys were talking. He was telling me the 101st, actually, I had gone on the computer and asked to see if our old unit was still active. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, you sign into a site, apparently. I got a call from a Fulberg Colonels at my house, and I thought it was a
Joke or something.
Yeah. And they said, we have been looking for you for a number of years.
Oh.
And I'm going, oh, God, what did I do now that I owe you money or something?
Yeah.
But he said, no, we have tried to track down people from the unit.
Yeah.
And he said there was one other guy from New York, and I said, Jeff Goodliff. And they went, you know Mr. Goodliff? I said, Jeff and I have been great pals.
Oh, yeah.
And they said, we're looking for him too. And I said, I'll have him contact you.
Oh, good.
They said, we want to invite you down to Fort Campbell. And we did. We went down there and were treated like kings when they got us back. But it was so funny, the progress, going through all that stuff. And we went on R&R together in Australia. He made me buy a suit.
I'll be done.
A pink suit of all things. I called it pink. I don't know what the hell it was. But we had the time of our life. And got back, and he just always remembered. But he told me that Vietnam, because he lost a lot of his friends from New York when he got home, because they were anti-military, anti-Vietnam, anti-everything. And he thought that was what he was supposed to do, you know, in his family. And that really hurt him a lot. And he got a Dear John letter while he was there, too. That didn't help. But he told me the last time we talked, he said, you know, this may not make sense, but I'm just kind of spinning my wheels now. He says, I'm just waiting to die. Now, what the hell are you talking about? He says, you know, Vietnam was the highest high you could ever get. I said, I didn't know you used drugs. And he looked at me like he was going to slap me. He said, no, you don't get it. And I did get it because I had the same thoughts, but I just wasn't going to tell him that. He said, that anticipation when you're out on a fire base of what's going to happen, and then nothing happens, nothing happens, nothing happens, and then like that, you don't know what's happening. But he says, the adrenaline rush was so high, he says, I'll never have that kind of experience again in my life. And he says, I swear to God, since I've been home, and he was very successful. He became an engineer in New York City, he had his own engineering firm. He says, but I just never, that was the highest of highs. He said, there was nothing that was ever going to match that. He said, and I came home and I was just so dissatisfied with the life around me. And he says, I've waited all this time. He says, I've had my life. He says, I've experienced it.
Yeah.
And I got to bury the damn fool. We outlived him, or I outlived him.
We were talking about C-rations, and so I started writing my memories of being in the Marine Corps. I hadn't talked. I have three sons. Hadn't talked much about it. We were on my sons and I were on a elk hunting trip up in Idaho, and I mentioned something about Vietnam, and I realized that I hadn't really told them anything about my experiences, so I decided I'd write this up. I've written over 3 years. I think I'm on my 94th chapter. Well, the chapters are short, they're like 2 pages. But at any rate, I want to read this part of this. It's about C-rations. The Marine Corps had 3 categories of meals: A rations, B rations, and C rations. A rations were fresh food. B rations were packaged, unprepared food for mess hall or field kitchen. C rations or C-rats were prepared, canned, wet rations to be eaten in the field. A rations were exceedingly rare in Vietnam. B rations were what we ate when we were not in the field, which brings me to C-rats. We all disliked C-rats. Maybe hated is not too strong a word. Each C-rat meal came in a pasteboard box. Within each box, on the left was a large can with a small flat can on top, and on the right were 2 small cans. The small flat can always contained some kind of a spread: peanut butter or jam or cheese. The 3 remaining cans held a meat unit, a bread unit, and a dessert unit. And each meal came with an accessory pack which contained the following: a plastic spoon, the only utensil, a pack of sugar, a pack of salt, instant coffee, cream substitute, 2 chiclets, 4 cigarettes, a book of matches, and a few sheets of toilet paper.
And cigarettes have black dots on it.
These individual C-rat meals came packed in a corrugated box containing 12 different meals. On each carton was printed the words meal, combat, individual. 12 different meals came in a corrugated cardboard box. The distribution of meals was important to everyone, and neither I nor anybody else could pull rank and say, I want such and such meal. Each meal was identified by a writing that named the meal unit on the pasteboard box. As I recall, Sergeant Page, that was my platoon sergeant, would open a carton and then empty it upside down. So emptied, the box's label identifying the meal couldn't be seen. Then Page would shuffle the boxes around on the ground so that the former position in the carton couldn't be used to ID the meal. After that, each man would pick a box, and then trading would begin.
Yep.
The meals that I recall were these: turkey loaf, spaghetti with meatballs, chopped ham and eggs, beans with frankfurter chunks, and least favorite of all, ham and lima beans, which everybody called ham and
With all the grease.
Chopped ham and eggs wasn't a favorite either, but I rather liked them, especially because its dessert unit was powdered cocoa and 4 cookies.
Yeah.
You could make an acceptable hot drink adding cocoa, sugar, and coffee. And the cookies were buttery, somewhat reminiscent of shortbread. The cans were opened with a P38, 4 of which were included in every carton of 12 meals. The P38 was a small can opener held between thumb and first fingers. We all became quite adept at using it. All the meat units had to be heated, otherwise they'd be caked in congealed grease. The heat source with which we were provided was a small violet-colored fuel tablet, trioxane, but we preferred to use C4 rolled into a small ball. That's less than explosive. The fuel tab had a noxious smell, and it took a long time to heat the food. The C4 burned very hot. You could easily boil a cup of water in less than a minute, so you had to be careful not to burn your food. And the C4 had a bad smell, kind of a metallic smell if you were downwind of it. We made stoves from cans in which we placed the C4, or the heat tab, and on which we placed the can containing the food to be heated. We made these stoves by taking an open small can and with the P38 cutting slits around the top and bottom edges. We made a drinking cups thus. You took a can, preferably a dry, large can, you opened it 90 degrees, then you folded the open portion back 180 degrees. I'll call that portion the flap. Then you take the flap and you bend it down, starting from one of the points on the rim where you stop cutting. And from the other point on the rim, you bend the flap down, and then you have a handle for your coffee. When we finished eating, we just threw cans down on the ground and left them there. I hate to think of the hundreds of thousands of cans we Marines left behind. Fortunately, they weren't made of aluminum. They must all be rusted away now.
Can I ask you a question on that?
Sure, yeah.
The one thing I remember, you have nailed that.
Yeah.
The water. I don't know what the Marines had, if they had blister bags or stuff, but they would fly in these big blivets to the fire bases,
Yeah.
which are basically big inner tubes or with water in it. The most putrid tasting water I ever had. And that's how we got the water on the fire base. And if there was a couple of times we were really looking for water.
Our water, well, when we were back in the battalion area, we had what was called a water buffalo. It was just a big tank. That was good water. When we went out in the field, all we had was what was in our canteens. And there were 2 occasions when I went for over 2 days without any water at all. All of our men, just drying the bone. In that heat.
Yeah, we had blister bags, and they had to put them water purification tablets in it.
We'd go,
Worst taste in water.
we'd go in and take a top of a high hill and turn it into fire bases and stuff, or go in and upgrade them or whatever they needed. So they would try to bring supplies in on the birds, and just you'd see them hanging from the bottom. But that water was the worst tasting stuff I've ever had, drinking it out of an inner tube. But when you're thirsty enough,
Most of our C-rations came from World War II. They were still left over from World War II.
Is that right?
Or Korea.
Yeah.
And I liked the work rations. Those were real good.
The what rations?
Work rations, long
Oh, yeah,
you guys had some Marines that got quite a few of the work rations.
Well,
They were
I
a kind of a plastic aluminum bag.
Yeah.
And you just pour hot water into them.
Yeah.
And
They used
the
them.
spaghetti and meatballs were great.
But they were packaged different. They were
Yeah.
lightweight.
Yeah.
They'd take them out on the long range patrols.
Yeah.
So
Those were pretty good. But
I always felt fortunate that I just never started smoking. I just never picked it up. And the most fortunate I felt was when I was in Vietnam, because you could always trade those 4 cigarettes for anything.
Yeah.
If you ended up with ham and lima beans, you'd say, hey, I'll trade my ham and lima beans and my cigarettes for whatever you've got.
Yeah.
And you could always trade it.
yeah.
Yeah, because I smoked, and I smoked those old cigarettes. And it took me many years to quit finally, but
I was smoking 3 packs a day.
I was.
Yeah.
I was too.
I never smoked.
Camels, Lucky Strikes, and Pall Malls. I never have stepped on any of that stuff. But, yeah, that was terrible. But I saw a guy pay $20. Now, remember, this is back in the early 70s.
Yeah.
To get a can of beans and franks.
Is that right?
He just had those lima beans. He just had the knack. He could, whatever, he would pick it out. If there was one box in there, and he was just going nuts. And this one guy had the pork and beans, and we're telling him, just give the guy, because he was a good guy.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't do it. And the guy pulled out a $20, well,
The NPC.
Yeah.
and the guy took it for that. But we didn't appreciate the guy taking the money. He should have just given him the can.
Yeah.
But he didn't. But boy.
But then the other cans you described, that wasn't there something like a pecan nut loaf
Yeah.
or something?
Oh, yeah.
It was good.
It was, what is that cake they make for Christmas? My mother loved it.
Yeah.
Fruitcake?
Fruitcake.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could go like 3 days on that stuff.
I know what?
Yeah.
We just took the fruitcake and gave it to some of the kids.
Oh,
Yeah.
I used to hoard that stuff because I like fruitcake because my mother's British, so I like
We all
it.
hated
But
it.
I could take little bits of that and go forever. You know, it didn't take much. You got the energy from it.
Yeah.
But it was just amazing that, you get a box and it was dated, right on it, dated.
Yeah.
42, 46,
Yeah.
48, and everything was still fresh.
Yeah.
In the cans.
Yeah.
It was just amazing that it was still edible.
Yeah.
There was a guy that told us he was from Pennsylvania where they were making some of those C-rations, and he found they used to put notes inside, right on the inside of the box.
Oh.
And he said he got one from the place he made it. I never saw it, but he told us. That was kind of unique. And isn't that something, you come back from Vietnam, that's a highlight of Vietnam? Hey, somebody sent me in the box where you guys made it.
Yeah.
Nice. Put the message in a bottle and throw it in the ocean.
Yeah.
But speaking of World War II stuff, so the Marines didn't have the good gear that the Army had, and the ponchos that we had were World War II ponchos, and those things,
They were terrible.
they were like a linen sheet or something. I mean, just try to roll up in that and sleep in
I thought ours were the same way. I mean,
Yeah.
if you got one that was waterproof, it was so hot inside it, you sweat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they didn't keep the water out. And I never saw one that kept
The other
the
thing
water
was we had flak jackets that were
Yeah.
Korean War vintage,
Wow.
and I think that we call them doggies. The doggies had nice, fitting. I don't know if it was Kevlar, but
Yeah, ours were all flak jackets too.
were they?
Yeah. Very seldom did you ever get a new one.
We didn't like them anyway, but we wore them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They helped. If we were going somewhere in the birds or something flying, we'd set on them. Take them off, set on them.
I remember.
Yeah, a good share of the time, we didn't wear them when we were firing guns or anything, unless there was an incoming or something like that.
Yeah.
We were lucky, we didn't have very many incoming, but like I said, we had jungle on two sides of us. So we had the street behind what was left of the bleachers, and then there was one other side up the sidewalk, and the other two sides was jungle. So a lot of times it was firepower on both sides of the jungle there. But, that's where all the villagers lived, was in those two jungly places. Oh, they were out a ways, but they, it sounded like they were right there.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Did your sons join the military?
No, none of them did.
Mine did. My son did join.
So that brings up a question I have. I think if I'm not mistaken, I heard that now it's like less than 10% of Americans are either veterans or in the military.
Yeah.
Less than 10%.
Yeah.
That's astounding to me.
It is, there were 500,000 Americans in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
They say what they want. I thought the military is so much better off when we had the draft.
Yeah.
And
I do too.
the way I say
I
that
definitely
because
do.
we got people from all walks of life and they contributed.
yeah, I agree with you.
I thought we really were great. I mean, my best friend, here he was, engineer who was drafted into the infantry and stuff. And me, a know-nothing kid from Vermont that had nothing going for him. And we bonded. We were the best of friends.
Yeah.
And
No, that's true. It was certainly a melting pot.
yeah.
All over.
Yeah.
Yeah, and everyone had something to offer, and that stuck with me when I went back in and moved up through the ranks, and you always found out what it was they had to offer. And the troops liked me because I knew the old tricks of P38 making stoves and
Yeah.
how to make a shower with a gallon can. That was uptown. If you could put the little holes in, put a half a helmet of water in that, then you could have a shower instead of just, I won't mention the other bath we took, not mixed company. I don't know if you use the same terms or not.
You mentioned going on R&R. You guys going on R&R as
Yeah, I
well?
went to Singapore.
Yeah.
I put in for 3, never got any of them.
Really? Were you there for the whole term? 12 months?
Well, they took me out about 3 weeks early.
Yeah.
They was pulling the 9th Division out. But they had so many that they pulled out at one time that they put us on a ship out in the South China Sea about, I don't know, a little ways offshore. And we had to stay out there for 2 weeks while they were processing us out. And that was the worst 2 weeks I ever had over there, that I thought. All you heard was shells going over you, and, being out there in the field, you hear shells going over, when's that one gonna hit? They were ones that were going all the way over, but, you were always knew that the one that you didn't hear was the one that was gonna hit.
I've got a question for everybody. This is important. Did you get to see Bob Hope?
No.
I did.
All right.
Yeah, they brought us in from a fire base in the Eagle Bowl. Greatest thing. You saw all these helicopters coming in, and because they wouldn't say which one he was on, obviously. But all of a sudden you see this group of guys on the ground, and you see this golf club going like this. And the commanding general was down over the hill and waiting to meet Bob Hope and his entourage and all this. And you see this golf club going down towards the general, and then it came off to the right, came right in front of all the troops. He walked up, took the microphone, he says, "Guys, I'm here to see you guys. I'll be right back." And they set all the wounded up front, and he was just so good with them. I don't remember who the woman's singer was. It might have been Ann Margaret, but Jim Neighbors was with him. And Vida Blue from the, I don't know what team he played for.
Right.
But Jim Neighbors, the sound system went out, and Jim Neighbors just reached down and a cappella sang. That was just something, but I can say I heard Bob.
Oh, that's great.
I need to make a head call. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
How do I find it?
Out to the left.
Thanks.
And then it's on your right.
But now, you were in Da Nang, or?
No, I was down in the Delta.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought.
You was in the 9th Division too then.
No, I was a mobile advisory team leader.
Oh,
So I'm part of.
so you weren't in it?
Yeah.
No. And in our little, we were in this little rinky-dink village, and but we got a call one time on the radio saying, "Hey, there's a USO tour that's in the area. They want to just drop in on a MAT team." I said, "Okay, fine." And so a few minutes later, this chopper comes in, And there are three guys on it, three of the, like VIPs. Turns out that they were all Indianapolis 500 drivers. Johnny Rutherford, Roger McCluskey, and I'm blanking on the third guy's name. But I thought, well, it's a nice thing, a nice effort for these guys, because they were way out in the boondocks. This was not like a big American base or anything. But it was really awkward. They got out of the chopper, and we got introduced and everything, and they're kind of saying, well, how's it going? And we're saying, well, we're here and we're doing what we can. And yeah, how's the racing going? How's the Indianapolis 500? Or but I always, after that, I kind of paid attention a little bit when they were, because they continued to race after that for a while.
I remember New Year's in Camp Eagle when we were back for the Bob Hope show. Jeff bought a bottle of Chevers 5-star Regal something for $3.
Yeah.
And we sat there, we thought we were just right in hog heaven sipping that. So,
Yeah.
when you were in Da Nang, did
Yeah.
you ever go up through the pass up into the mountain?
No, never did.
Well, just north of that airfield, if you followed the ocean around,
Yeah.
there was a little village there
Yeah.
that nobody went into because I was up on that fire base on top of there at one time. We came back down south to do a job up there. And, excuse me, and there was a guy that we called Mr. Clean. He was in the Army, but I don't know what he did, but he had a shaved head and an earring and nobody cared. But he would go scrounging and he would go around and he didn't go in there, and we asked him, what's the deal with this village down there? It's beautiful. It reminded me later in life of Gilligan's Island type thing. Leper village.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, and he says nobody goes in there. They're
Yeah.
peaceful. They're great people, but nobody goes in there. And I've asked people a lot of times. There's one other guy that I mentioned it to, and he said, yeah, it's a leper village. So, interesting, the things we saw, the mountain yard villagers.
Yeah.
We'd throw out, we'd kill one of the big lizards as we're going out or something. And when we went through the village, we couldn't associate with any of the civilians. But we'd toss those things out to them, and they loved those things.
It's ironic, isn't it? Because that was my mission,
Yeah.
to interact with the local villagers and to coordinate with the local village chief. We tried to set up elections and,
Yeah.
and I was always, having meals with them and going out on little local operations with their...
Did you learn any Vietnamese?
Very little bit,
Yeah.
but not much. I had an interpreter.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But it's ironic, isn't it, that you guys weren't even allowed to interact with them at all, and that
Yeah.
was my mission.
Yep, we couldn't. Our unit, they told us, we're not here to make friends with anybody. We've got other jobs to do. Don't do it.
We didn't have that. I mean, not that I saw a lot of civilians, but we would, periodically go through a village and go into people's hutches and,
Yeah.
looking for weapons or something like that.
They found that big, just north of Da Nang, a place called Firebase Rifle, right off the side of it, that big, massive. Not that I would say that we might have found some of those AK-47s and sold them to new lieutenants because they were fully automatic. The semi-automatic you could take home to mama, but they didn't know it, so we kind of sold it to the lieutenants, just a couple.
So just being aware of time, I don't know if we want to do last thoughts. You guys, once we turn off, you can keep talking, but any last thoughts or any last one thing that you want to share?
Well, I want to say that the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese were tremendous fighters and enemies. And, the Americans lost 58,000, and we Americans killed millions of Vietnamese north and south. I think 2 million is a small estimate. I've seen estimates as high as 5 and 6 million. And they were just, you know, they were in it to win it, and they're a tough enemy.
Yeah, they're the human life, though, that they would throw themselves on stuff, at stuff.
Yeah.
But my final thought is this was much easier than I thought. When we got going here, I was listening to when you got on the C-ration. You had me. And we thank you very much for allowing us to be here. Dennis saw me yesterday. I was not prepared. I didn't know what we were going to do. And my memories, you have to remember, our memories, all of us, it's been over 50 years now.
Yeah.
I wish somebody had tried to get us together 50-some years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd have seen a little more, probably, harshness in our tone and stuff because of the times. But things come together after a while. And I still haven't gone to the wall.
Oh.
I've been there.
Oh, you gotta go to the wall.
Oh, I've
It's a holy place.
I've got a very good friend on the wall. And I just,
Have you been to the virtual wall?
yeah.
Yeah, I've been to that.
They came by. When I was in Chicago, they invited me to sit on the reviewing stand. And
I'm talking about online. You go online to a virtual wall.
Yeah.
You click in your buddy's name, and there'll be a portrait of him, likely,
Yeah.
and all the ribbons that he got, and, you know.
I don't know how
He
many.
was a Marine, by the way.
You know.
Yeah.
I don't know how many of you know it, but the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in the rest area
Yeah.
here in
Sure.
Sharon
Yeah.
has got the names of all of the
Well, the
veterans
Vermonters.
that came,
All of them
went from
Vermonters.
Vermont.
Yeah. Yeah.
All
Yeah,
of
I didn't know that until somebody took me over. We were doing a coffee break up there a couple of years ago, and they said, "That's your name down there, dummy." I said, "I'm not dead." He said, "Jesus, you must have been the smartest draftee they ever had."
And also the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Randolph, or in Sharon, is the first one that was built in the United States.
Uh-huh.
And the reason they picked the area and the way that it's facing is because some of the ones that was on the board for the memorial looked out through that window, and they said it reminded them of the Highlands.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Of course, the jungle was altogether different. It didn't, you know, it was
Pretty
just
abrupt hills, though,
Yeah.
right there. That's
Yeah.
right.
And I have to come here to meet people from Parkland and Thetford, and I don't want to meet Dennis anymore.
Dave and I have worked together off and on a few talk things. I'd like to.
Enjoyed meeting everybody.
Yeah, yes.
We got one last one for one last thought.
Oh, yeah, no, thanks very much for doing this, and thanks for your work with the VA. And I think that I probably can speak for all of us that we're really grateful for the VA, and especially for this facility here.
Oh, well, thank you. It's an honor for
Final
us.
words from an officer in the Army. Just saying.
All right. Well, folks, thank you so much for listening in, and thank you. Thank you for your service, and thank you for being here today. I know that it seemed just like a casual conversation for you, but those listening in, the comments of thank you for your service, thank you for doing this. And I guarantee to you, like the last time we did this, I have Vietnam veterans calling me and saying thank you and bringing back memories that they kind of pushed away. So what you're doing today is just phenomenal, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.